Melody has returned to court and filed additional paperwork against her ex-husband, Martell Holt. As many already know, the two have continued dealing with legal matters since their divorce, especially when it comes to custody and financial issues. Back in October 2025, they were scheduled to revisit their custody arrangement for their 4 children, but Martell reportedly missed that court date because he was in Los Angeles filming Love and Marriage, Huntsville, although his attorney did appear on his behalf. After that hearing, the court maintained joint legal custody, meaning both parents still share decision-making rights for the children, but Melody was granted sole physical custody, so the kids primarily live with her while Martell has visitation rights. Now the situation has escalated financially, as Martell reportedly still owes around $7,000 from a previous court judgment. Since that amount has not been paid, Melody has now taken further legal action by filing for wage garnishment. The court documents were electronically filed on April 24, 2026, in the Circuit Court of Madison County, Alabama, under a process of garnishment. In the filing, Melody is listed as the plaintiff and Martell as the defendant, while a bank is named as the garnishee, meaning it is responsible for helping collect the funds. The records show the original judgment was entered on June 18, 2024, with the base amount of $7,000, which has now increased to $8,019 after adding $967 in interest and $52 in court costs. The garnishment order states that up to 25% of Martell's disposable weekly income can be withheld, or the amount above a protected minimum, whichever is less. The paperwork was signed and notarized on April 22, 2026. A separate document, known as a writ of garnishment, instructs officials to serve the order to the bank and notify Martell. The bank is required to respond within 30 days or risk legal consequences. It must also confirm whether it holds any funds belonging to Martell, whether it owes him money now or in the future, and if so, those funds must be held and eventually sent to the court until the debt is fully paid. If Martell's employment ends before the full amount is collected, the employer or bank must report it and forward any withheld funds within 15 days. Overall, this shows that Melody is moving forward legally to recover what she is owed. Wage garnishment is usually considered a last step after other attempts to collect payment have failed, and it means the court is now directly enforcing the debt. This situation also highlights that financial issues between the two are still ongoing even after their divorce and custody rulings, and it may continue affecting their co-parenting dynamic. Since the original judgment dates back to 2024, it's clear this has been a long-running issue that has now reached enforcement stage. At this point, it will continue until the full balance is paid, and this is likely not the end of the legal process. This also raises questions about what may have happened behind the scenes during that time. In many cases like this, there are often attempts to settle payments privately, possible extensions, or arrangements made before things reach the level of garnishment. Since the court has now stepped in with enforcement, it suggests that those earlier efforts either didn't work or weren't completed as required. It's also important to understand how serious wage garnishment can be. Once it is in place, a portion of a person's income is automatically withheld before they even receive their paycheck. That money is then directed toward the court to go toward the outstanding debt. This process continues until the full balance, including interest and fees, is completely paid off. In situations like this, it can take months or even longer depending on how much is being collected at a time. Another key point is the involvement of the bank. When a financial institution is named as the garnishee, it means the court is not only targeting wages, but also looking at any accounts or funds that may be connected to the person in question. The bank is legally required to cooperate, provide information, and hold any applicable funds until the court directs otherwise. This ensures that the debt cannot be easily avoided or delayed. From a broader perspective, this situation also shows how unresolved financial issues can continue to carry over long after a divorce. Even though custody decisions have already been made, ongoing legal and money-related disputes can still create tension between former partners. And while they share joint legal custody, Situations like this can sometimes make communication and cooperation more difficult, especially when court enforcement is involved. At the same time, the legal system is simply carrying out its process. Once a judgment is issued, the court has the authority to enforce payment through methods like garnishment to ensure debts are settled properly. Some people may view this as strict, while others see it as necessary to uphold accountability. Moving forward, this case will likely continue until the full amount is recovered, unless another agreement is reached or the debt is cleared sooner. Depending on how payments are made, this could remain active for quite some time. So overall, this is still an ongoing situation, and it shows how legal and financial matters like this don't just disappear, they continue until everything is fully resolved. At this point, the focus now shifts to how the garnishment will actually play out in real time. Once the bank and employer begin processing the order, payments will typically be taken directly from Martell's income and forwarded through the court system until the balance is reduced. This means the debt will no longer rely on voluntary payments, but instead on a structured legal collection process that runs in the background of his earnings. It will also be important to see how quickly the bank responds to the court order. Since they are required to answer within a set time frame, any delays or failures to comply could create additional legal consequences for the institution as well. In most cases, banks tend to act quickly to avoid penalties and ensure they remain in compliance with court instructions. Meanwhile, for Melody, this filing signals that she is continuing to enforce the judgment through official legal channels rather than informal communication. Once a garnishment is in place, it typically remains active until the debt is fully satisfied or the court modifies the order. That means this situation may not require further filings unless new issues arise or additional enforcement becomes necessary. From a broader standpoint, cases like this often take time to fully resolve, especially when payments are collected gradually through wages or financial accounts. Even though the process is straightforward legally, the actual timeline can stretch depending on income, employment status, and how consistently funds are available to be withheld. It also highlights how post-divorce legal matters can continue long after custody agreements are finalized. Even when parenting arrangements are settled, financial obligations can still remain active and enforceable, keeping both parties tied to the court system in different ways. As things move forward, the next updates will likely depend on whether payments begin flowing through the garnishment order and how long it takes to satisfy the remaining balance. Until then, this remains an active legal matter that is still developing behind the scenes. At this stage, the situation essentially moves from court filing into enforcement and monitoring. Once garnishment is active, the court's main concern becomes whether payments are being collected correctly and whether all parties involved are complying with the order. That means both the employer and the bank will have ongoing responsibilities to ensure the withheld funds are properly tracked and sent through the legal system. If everything proceeds as ordered, Martell's debt will gradually decrease over time with each payment cycle. However, if there are any issues, such as missed responses from the garnishee, employment changes, or insufficient funds, the court may require additional updates or issue further instructions to adjust the process. In some cases, garnishment orders can also be modified if financial circumstances change significantly. For Melody, the legal action taken now represents enforcement rather than negotiation. At this point, the court judgment has already been established, so the focus is no longer on proving the debt but on collecting it in full. That's why garnishment is often seen as one of the final tools used in civil financial cases. It shifts responsibility from the individuals to the legal system for execution. From Martell's side, this also means the debt will continue to follow him until it is fully resolved, regardless of other ongoing professional or personal activities. Even if income sources change, the obligation remains active until the court records show the balance has been satisfied or officially closed. As for the overall timeline, there is usually no exact end date for cases like this. The duration depends entirely on how quickly the total amount is paid off through withheld income or any lump sum payments made toward the balance. Some garnishments resolve relatively quickly, while others can remain active for an extended period. In the bigger picture, this entire situation highlights how court orders extend far beyond the initial ruling. Once financial judgments are entered, they don't simply end, they move into enforcement until completion. That's why cases like this often continue quietly in the background even after major custody or divorce decisions have already been finalized. So moving forward, the key developments to watch will be whether payments begin consistently, whether the full amount is reduced over time, and whether any additional court actions are needed. Until then, this remains an ongoing legal process that is still unfolding step by step. At this point, another important factor to consider is how both parties choose to move forward outside of the courtroom. In many post-judgment cases like this, there is sometimes still room for negotiation or settlement even after garnishment begins. For example, the debt could potentially be paid off in a lump sum or through an alternative agreement if both sides and the court approve it. However, unless that happens, the garnishment order will continue as written until the full balance is cleared. It's also worth noting that financial enforcement cases often create ripple effects beyond just the individuals involved. When wages are being garnished, it can impact budgeting, financial planning, and overall stability, which is why courts set specific limits like the percentage cap on disposable income. These limits are meant to balance debt recovery with basic financial protection for the person paying. On the administrative side, the court will continue to monitor compliance through submitted responses from the bank and employer. Any missed deadlines, incorrect reporting, or failure to withhold funds properly can bring the case back before the judge for review. In some situations, this can lead to additional hearings or amended orders to correct the process. For both Melody and Martell, this stage also means the legal system is now the main driver of resolution rather than direct communication between them. Once enforcement begins, personal disagreements typically take a backseat to procedural requirements, deadlines, and official filings. That often changes the dynamic significantly, especially in cases where co-parenting is still ongoing. Looking ahead, the next meaningful developments will likely come in the form of compliance reports, payment confirmations, or updates from the court regarding the status of the garnishment. If payments are consistent, the case will gradually move toward resolution. If complications arise, it could extend the process further or bring additional legal adjustments. Ultimately, this remains an active and developing situation, and its outcome will depend on how smoothly the enforcement process continues and whether the debt is fully satisfied over time. Moving forward, another key aspect that often comes into play in cases like this is documentation and verification of payments. As funds begin to be withheld and sent through the court system, detailed records are kept to ensure every payment is properly applied to the outstanding balance. This helps both sides track exactly how much has been paid, how much interest remains, and what the updated total looks like at any given time. In addition, if there are any disputes about the amount being collected or the calculation of interest and fees, either party can request a court review. This means the judge can step back in to confirm whether the garnishment is being applied correctly or whether any adjustments need to be made. While this doesn't happen in every case, it is available if discrepancies arise. It's also possible that additional enforcement tools could be used if needed. Although wage garnishment is one of the most common methods, courts can sometimes approve other collection measures depending on the situation and available assets. However, those steps are typically only considered if standard garnishment does not fully resolve the debt in a reasonable time frame. From a practical standpoint, the emotional and financial stress of ongoing legal action can also influence how quickly parties decide to resolve matters. In some situations, individuals choose to settle remaining balances early just to close the case and avoid prolonged deductions. In others, they allow the process to continue steadily until completion without additional intervention. For now, the most important indicator of progress will simply be consistent payments being processed through the system. If those payments remain steady, the case will gradually move toward closure without further escalation. If anything disrupts that flow, the court may step in again to reassess the situation and ensure compliance continues. Overall, This remains a structured legal process that will continue operating in the background until the full judgment is satisfied, marking the final resolution of the financial matter between the parties. At this point, the case is essentially in its final long-term phase, where progress is measured in payments rather than new filings. Each deduction that goes through the system will slowly reduce the outstanding balance until it eventually reaches zero. Once that happens, the court will officially close the garnishment order and issue confirmation that the judgment has been fully satisfied. After closure, both